What's going on, guys? MegaGig back with another video, back in Diablo 3 with our Barbarian, doing something that I've actually wanted to do for some time now, and I kind of forgot about it. And then Riker released his tier update video for all of the builds in the game, or a majority of the builds in the game anyways. And that reminded me that I wanted to do this, especially being a Barb main. So what I've done is I've got a bunch of footage, and I've got the top, I think it's like maybe the top 6 or most popular 6 or so. I think it's 6 builds for Barbarian that are mainly played. And so I'm going to go through and kind of discuss each build briefly. And I'm going to give the build 3 different scores on a scale of 1 to 10 on 3 different criteria. And the first is going to be overall build strength. The second is going to be skill playability, or skill needed to achieve that. Skill level required to get the most out of the build. That doesn't mean these builds won't be fun to play just to play, but if you want to get the most out of the build, the skill level will be, somewhere 1 through 10, kind of like strength. And then the last is going to be gear ability, or how easy it is to gear for that particular build. So I've worked on this for a little while. I hope you guys enjoy this video, and if you do, leave a like and a comment and subscribe if you want to see more. Without further ado, let's get into it, guys. Alright, guys, so the first build we're starting out with is the Lawn build, or the Legacy of Nightmares build, and like all the other classes pretty much, these builds have fallen by the wayside. They are not very strong anymore when compared to pretty much nearly any other build since season 12, really. So the ranks I gave this, I gave it a strength rank of a 4, a skill level rank of 5, and a gear level of 10. Why did I give it those scores? Strength level 4 when comparing this build to tons of other builds, especially even just Barbarian builds. It's just so very weak. So we gave it a 4 there. Skill level wise, I give it a 5, kind of middle of the road. It's not really that hard to play. You can see in the video, I've got some gameplay footage going, and I'm running through everything. In that particular version, I have illusory boots on. It makes it a little easier to play. If you don't have illusory boots on, it's going to make it a little harder to play. So the build overall, to get really good, isn't hard to really learn, but there are a few things that you kind of need to follow. So I just gave it a 5 on that. For gear, I gave it a 10, though. This build is very hard to gear for and is not really worth the time anymore. You have to have all ancient pieces of well, you can technically use set pieces, but you can't have any set bonuses. But to really make the build work as strong as it is, there's specific ancient pieces of legendary items that you need, and you need to have every piece you wear be ancient to get the most out of this build. And so it's a very hard build to gear for unless you just get extremely lucky with your drops. I missed a progression orb. I didn't notice that when I was playing. So yeah, that is the Legacy of Nightmares build. It's a build that anymore it's not really worth it. It's still fun to play. I really like the play style. I always enjoyed the Frenzy skill back in the day before the Crusader was released. So, it's still fun to play and can still be, somewhat strong, but when compared to everything else, this build just completely falls out of strength. And yeah, it's very, very weak. But yeah, feel free to play it if it fits your play style and you really want something that's challenging to build for. Alright guys, next on the list is the Leap Quake. This build is a ton of fun. However, it can get old after a while. But it is a great build to leap around, gives you great mobility You get in and out of places. Very, very tough. Lots of toughness with this build. So, yeah, without further ado, let's get into the scores. I give it a strength rank of a 7, a skill level rank of 6, and a gear rank of 6 as well. So the strength level, I gave it a 7. This build is strong and can do a lot of damage, especially AoE damage, but there aren't really any multipliers involved. Even with a lot of density, you're still just doing kind of a flat damage no matter how much real density you have, unless you're really getting your Battle Rage Bloodshed to really pop. But in general, the damage in this build doesn't really scale with anything. It doesn't scale with density or whatever. So it's still just kind of flat damage. So even though it does great damage, it eventually kind of falls off. And so that's why I only give it a strength rank of a 7. Skill level wise, to play this, I gave it a 6. Slightly higher than the Legacy of Nightmares build. It's pretty easy to play, jumping around. You don't generally get CC'd or anything like that. However, it does take a little bit of getting used to the jumping around and remembering what skills to hit when. Depending on what skills you're using, what version of this build, there's a certain rotation you should kind of follow, and knowing when to use your Wrath of the Berserker and this and that. So skill level wise, I gave it a 6. Still not very difficult to play, and still a lot of fun to play. Gear wise, this build is fairly easy to gear for. I gave it a 6 again. To get the most out of it, of course, you want all legendary pieces, but most of the gear for this build it's pretty common. It'll drop pretty easily. You don't have to have all ancients to get this build. You just have to have all of the pieces, all the set pieces, and everything to play it. And then there's other things that fall into place that make the build even more powerful. But in general, the build is not that hard to gear for. Most of the stuff is pretty common, so I gave it a gear rank of 6. Seems pretty fair, I think. Yeah. But yeah, that is the Leapquake build. It's a lot of fun. Feel free to give this build a try, especially if you want something that has loads and loads and loads of toughness, guys. Loads of toughness with this build. Alright guys, next on the list is the Charge Seismic Slam build. This is the 6-piece Raycore 4-piece Immortal King set. This build mainly revolves around Seismic Slam doing the bulk of your damage. Charge is mainly just a mobility skill, but you also are using it for the 6-piece Raycore bonus where you save up charge stacks and then you dump them to add a huge multiplier to your Seismic Slam, increasing the damage just exponentially. So this build's a lot of fun to play. Let's get into the ranks. I give it a strength rank of 8. I gave it a skill level rank of a 7, and I gave it a gearing rank of a 6. So 8, 7, 6. Strength rank of 8. This build is very, very strong, especially in density when you are able to hit a ton of stuff with your Seismic Slam, and then especially if you charge in as well, and you get the damage bonus from your Battle Rage Bloodshed to go off at the same time. You're doing a ton of AoE damage. This build still kind of suffers on single target damage. You're not getting the multiplier from your Battle Rage Bloodshed like you would on AoE damage. So this build does do a ton of damage. It's probably not the highest damage build. It's the highest burst damage, but when you take into consideration, constant damage, constant stacking up of your gems and whatnot, in my mind, it's still an 8. You guys can argue in the comments if you wanted it to be higher, a 9, or maybe you want it to be lower, maybe you only want it to be a 7. I don't know. But I ended up giving it an 8. For level-wise, skill level-wise, to play this build, I give it a 7. This build is somewhat difficult to play because of the charge mechanic, because you do need that charge to keep going so you can charge up your Fury and dump your Seismic Slam. Without your charge stacks, you're not going to be doing any damage. So it does make it somewhat difficult to play, but it's not too bad, especially if you have density. The only time that this build really gets hard to play is if you're up against 2 units where you're not getting those charge stacks to reset. So skill level wise, it's still not too hard to play. You essentially just charge around, get stacks up, and then dump your Fury from your Seismic Slam with the Rumble Rune attached, and rinse and repeat. Not too hard to play, but it does take some skill. For gearing wise, I gave this a 6 as well as Leap Quake. It's not too hard to gear for, nothing really special about it. You do need 2 different sets of gear sets. You need 4-piece of Immortal Kings and 6-piece of Raycore. Those are pretty common items, though, that drop. Nothing real special needed with this build. So yeah, I gave it a gearing rank of 6. It's not too hard to gear for in comparison to everything else. Alright guys, next up we have the Hoda build, the Hammer of the Ancients build. This is a very, very fun build, and it's also very, very strong, and probably overall one of the strongest builds. So without further ado, let's get into the ranks of that. For strength, I gave this build a 9.5. For level requirement, or skill level requirement to play this build optimally, I gave it a 5. And gearing for the build, I gave it an 8. So let's go over these ranks. Strength rank of 9.5. I gave it a 9.5 because it just does insane damage. It does insane AoE damage, and the more Fury you have, the more the higher your chance to crit is. And it also does really, really, really good single target damage. And so while some other builds might do more AoE damage than this total, this outshines them in single target damage as well. And so overall, this build, I feel, does enough damage to deserve a rank of a 9.5 on my 1 to 10 scale. You guys may argue different. Of course, you can argue all of this stuff in the comments if you like. But yeah, a 9.5 for strength is what I gave the Hoda build. Skill level required to play this, I gave it about a 5. It's not really that hard to play. The only thing that really gets difficult, there's 2 things that are somewhat difficult, but not really. The charge, you only get 1 stack, but we're using the Merciless Assault rune. So as long as you have density, you're going to be resetting your stacks. Again, you don't really need the stacks too much. Just to keep up your Band of Might. But again, that's not too big of a deal. And the other portion of the build that is a little challenging is keeping your Fury up if you're in a big group, trying to keep your Fury up and only hit a few enemies at once, because you can, if you're using the Aquila Cuirass, your Fury will drop off and you'll lose a lot of toughness that way. I don't use Aquila in mine. I use Mage Fist, I think it's called, to do 20% more fire damage because we're using a fire rune. But yeah, and then gearing wise, I actually gave this an 8. This build is pretty hard to gear for if you're using the Istvan's set, the Istvan's Pair's Blade, Little Rogue, and Slander. Those weapons are pretty rare to drop, especially if you're looking for good ancient versions of them. The other gear itself, you just need the Immortal King set. That stuff's not too hard to gear for. The rest of the stuff isn't really too hard to gear for, but the reason this build is hard to gear for, if you want to do it really properly, at least as most people do, you'll need the Istvan set, and those items, those swords, can be pretty tough to gear for. Alright guys, here we are with my favorite build, the Whirlwind build. You guys know this is the build I main. It's a ton of fun, it's easy to play, and people have loved whirlwinding around since, sometime in Diablo 2, I don't know. But yeah, it's just a ton of fun. Let's get into the ranks here. Strength ranked, I gave it a 9. Skill level required to play it, I gave it a 5. And gearing level, I gave it a 7. So strength ranked, I gave it a 9. That is slightly lower than the Hoda at 9.5. This build really requires a lot of density to shine, especially in higher greater rifts. However, if you get that density, you can do insane damage, guys. This build is definitely built for AoE, for a large, for area of effect, if you don't know what AoE means. Large, massive amounts of density. Single target, it's not really the greatest because, again, to do your maximum damage, you need a lot of density. But with the attack speed of this build, you're attacking so fast, you do stack up your Bane of the Stricken a little bit faster. So single target isn't bad with this build, but it's really not great. Again, density, man. Density is key with the Whirlwind build. Skill level to play it, I gave it a 5. It's not very hard to play. What you're seeing in the video is the speed version, more or less. But yeah, the overall, the build is not that hard to play. You just mainly have to remember to hit your Immortal King, or your Immortal Kings, your Wrath of Berserker, and keep up your Ignore Pain. Other than that, it's not too hard to play. There's a few other skills you can sub in, but overall, skill level required to play this build, probably about a 5. Gearing for this build, I gave a 7. It's not the hardest build to gear for. Most of the gear is pretty common. The Wrath of the Waste set and everything else that goes with it. The only reason I gave it a 7 instead of something lower is because of the weapons. The Bolcathos weapons are what I use, and they are somewhat rare. Not as rare as the Istvan's paired blades, but they can be a pain to drop both of them. And you do need both of them if you're going to run one of them and get the movement speed bonus and the attack speed bonus and all that stuff. So overall, yeah, that is the Whirlwind build. Last but certainly not least, guys, is the Barbarian Charge build. This is the 6-piece Immortal Kings 4-piece Raycore set. This build revolves around Charge doing a ton of damage itself. And then Seismic Slam is basically just there to dump your Fury, heal you up, reset your cooldowns for Call of the Ancients and Wrath of the Berserker. So, yeah, so this build got a Strength rank of 10, Skill level rank of 10, and Greater Rift, a Gear score of 6. So with the Strength rank, I gave it a 10. Though this build does somewhat suffer from single target damage, the damage it does in AoE situations with medium to high density is just unreal. It does outdamage the Whirlwind Barb. It does outdamage the Hoda Barb in density, and the build is just unbelievable. And yeah, that's why I gave it a strength rank of 10, even though it does suffer a little bit in single target. It's still the strongest overall. Many people would say the strongest overall Barb build, and I'm inclined to agree, even though I enjoy the Whirlwind build better. Between this, Whirlwind, and Hoda, all three have seen their time at the top of the leaderboard list the last couple of seasons. So, yeah, so take that for what you will. Again, you can argue stuff down in the comments. Feel free to, fine by me. Skill level required, I also gave it a 10. Reason for this is the charge stacks. Managing the charge stacks is where it can be very difficult. And getting the most damage out of the build, it's not enough to just spam charge on a single spot. You really need to be charging kind of back and forth and managing your stacks and not running out of stacks. Because if you run out of stacks like I do there in the video, though it's just a T13, so no big deal, you're not doing anything at all. You have nothing to generate Fury. Seismic Slam's not doing anything. So this build is, it's not that hard to really play, but it is very hard to get good at and really push high. And it takes a lot of skill to manage everything with this build. Yeah, and then gear score wise, I gave it a 6. This build is not really that hard to gear for. A lot of the items are fairly common. and yeah, so they drop pretty quick. It's not too hard to gear for. Alright guys, well that is my ranking of some of the top played Barb builds. Obviously there are a few outlier builds out there like the Immortal King's Ren set that I never really liked. There's support Barb, things like that. But I hope you guys enjoyed this little video. Just a bunch of footage I got and a bunch of footage I threw together, and then I thought I'd throw some ranks on there and let you guys see if you agree or disagree in the comments. Feel free to let me know on any of them. If you would move any of the numbers up or down, if you agree, disagree, either way. If you like the video, please leave a like and a comment. Subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you guys for watching. More good stuff to come. Take care.